Welcome to the Pander Brothers podcast, where we talk comics, movies, and cross-media storytelling.
Today we pick back up on our conversation about the evolution of our project GirlFIEND, from original screenplay to the graphic novel published by Dark Horse Comics and digitally available on our imprint fusecomics.com. This episode we tackle the journey of our first digitally illustrated graphic novel, how it made the project possible, and how it transformed our collaboration. All right, so back to the conversation.
I feel like we've always been pretty good at adapting and actually embracing new media, and it's been a big part of our the stories we've told in independent comics is kind of finding innovative ways to expand the narrative. And but this was really just a completely new way of drawing a comic book for us. We saw the potential of doing something, hopefully faster. There'd be a slight learning curve, but it did present this potential for that, because we were, facing the reality that this was going to be a big book. This wasn't going to just be some, 40-page thing or something. This was like a 200 and plus page graphic novel.
And part of that process was really starting to go through the script and break it down into beats and into panels. And traditionally, on average, I would say a comic book has about 6 panels per page on average. And that obviously, fluctuates from one big panel to, lots of small panels for action bits or whatever. But in general, it's 6 panels per page. And with that, we started going through the screenplay and literally just marking the individual pieces of action on a page, and maybe roughly like 2 passages of dialogue per panel if it were a dialogue heavy scene and versus an action oriented scene. And what seemed to trend out on that as we went through it was that for every 1 page of screenplay action, it would amount to 2 pages of comic book. And we had 120-page screenplay. Right. So we were like, okay, well, there you go. We've got to be able to draw 240 pages of comic book art, which is roughly what it ended up being. And it was like, how the heck are we going to do that? Because we had drawn a comic book called XXX, which has now been rebranded and republished as Dissident X. And that was a 336-page book, which took us years to draw. I mean, literally, it took.
Well, and I think we were kind of looking at 3 things just from a completely different vantage point, even just as far as the artistic approach, and I think each story, at least in our case, we've always approached each story with a kind of almost its own style, and so part of GirlFIEND, was really digging into this idea of it just being really pulpy, and knowing that it was gonna mostly be a black and white, or more than likely be a black and white book. We really thought along those lines, like, let's really design this book to be black and white.
Yeah, and what I'm remembering now is that we started drawing the book, and one of the on paper, and traditionally, or just our background, we started drawing comics in 1985 or 6, published comic books. And that industry, all the way up until 2004 when we did Batman, was all drawn on paper. And T-squares, rulers, penciling on
hand
the
lettering.
paper, hand lettering, all of it. And so, that's super time consuming. And so in the case of GirlFIEND, that's what we started doing. We're like, okay, let's, start drawing these pages. And as we started drawing, I think maybe the first 10 or 20 pages
became very apparent that this was a non-starter.
No, there was just no way. It was so laborious and so time intensive. And that's around the time we started going, let's look at this digital thing. And I think we had been to a couple of conventions where people were discussing. I feel like we were either listening to a panel or we were on a panel, and there was a conversation that some of these artists, younger artists, were talking about drawing digitally. And part of the conversation was just their ability to work really much faster.
Right.
Of course, that really piqued our attention, and so we started to explore that. However, we did have those original pages, and I think what we did is we took those original pages and approached Dark Horse with those. Is that what we did, or did we already draw? Because I remember what we did is we
Well,
approached...
I know that we had approached Dark Horse with, probably with some works in progress that were based on those original drawings. But I think mostly we had pitched this vision, the overall vision. But I do remember we used those drawings as sort of like the basis of the first pages, because we would just import the pencils in to the program.
Well, the reason why I was kind of going back to just the pitch is that eventually, Dark Horse, because we had the entire script, they knew where it was going, that we had the whole vision there, that they...
I know we did some mock comic book covers.
Yeah, there was a number of things they
because we originally pitched it as a series, and we actually wrote it.
But they agreed to publish it. They were like, we'll publish it, but it's going to have to be black and white.
That's right.
And that's what kind of set us on the road to kind of creatively think about the project as a black and white book in terms of just the way we were going to draw it. But you're right. We wanted to go in and create a series because we felt like this would create kind of traction, and it would be able to build up the project over time.
And build, hopefully, a fan base. And the whole idea of a series is to kind of, have those cliffhangers, have your audience, get number 2, number 3. Oh, the next one's coming out.
Get invested in
the story. And we felt pretty confident about that, that it's a page turner and it had these good hooks. And even though we wrote this thing as one story, that it was kind of amazing. We were able to find those, some pretty great moments to have those cliffhanger moments. And so as a result, so then we go to pitch it to Dark Horse, and aside from the black and white caveat, there was also this trend of graphic novels and books and full graphic novels selling better than series, or what they call floppies now. And that, we ran the risk of publishing the first issue or the second issue, but if, say, the second or third issue didn't do the numbers, that they would potentially cancel the series midway through. And so rather than take that risk, we thought, well, let's just get the whole, thing done as one book. But we also run the risk of not being able to build that fan base. But it also is what was kind of cool about it was, now that, because we'd already broken it into those kind of cliffhanger, breaks, it became like a 6-chapter graphic novel. So those, they really had a nice, it just felt very realized as a story. And I think that was because we'd taken a lot of time on the screenplay, translating it. We put the time into that even before we pitched it. And so we knew what the story was going to be. And so we had the ability also to adapt to, whatever the current demands were upon a graphic novel.
Yeah, and that was good. I mean, I think that was one thing that, we've learned over time too, is I think when we were younger, we were a little bit more like, this vision has got to go through in terms of the way we want it to be done. We want it all printed on newsprint and have it be like its own newspaper or whatever. Is listening to the publishers from the vantage point of like, they do know the market and they want this book to be a success. And so it does make sense to, you don't want to give over your entire, vision of what you're hoping to attain. But at the same time, it does make sense to kind of figure out what the heck is going on in the market at that time. So you do have
a balancing act. I mean,
success.
Yeah. It's because there's arguments against that, to just hold on to your vision all the way through.
I don't mean content per se, but just like the delivery of the stuff, and then.
But it's true. I think when you can, think from that vantage point, just think kind of holistically, seeing the whole thing and reverse engineering things, and think like a producer in a way, or think like a publisher. You can, if you can kind of put yourself in their shoes, then it's maybe easier for them to put themselves in your shoes. So you can kind of compromise or negotiate more effectively.
Yeah,
You know?
and also just educate yourself to what is going on, because the market and the industry is constantly changing, constantly in flux. So
And it's whether it's comics or movies,
Film,
and so and so again, trial by fire. We kind of learn by doing, and that's kind of always especially in these, anytime you're exploring a new genre or a new industry, even, you're always going to learn. And
But I would say, so kind of getting back to the whole thing of like embracing the digital drawing form, one of the things I think that we started to figure that this could be about twice as fast drawing it digitally as it could be if we did it analog. And so we basically started looking into the equipment. So we can talk a little bit about just the process we used, and one of them was these Cintiq tablets.
Right.
So we knew that we needed to be able to physically draw on a screen.
yes,
And so we basically started hunting these things down in Portland, on Craigslist.
Right.
Found these big old clunky.
they were very
Early-
clunky and just kind of awkward to draw on at first.
Because there was a
Because they
little
didn't-
latency, like they weren't
Yeah.
totally in sync, and also the pen felt like it was just a little bit off the surface. So it was
Right.
it was almost
There was a disconnect going on. So you had to almost like rewire your brain a little bit to even do the thing, especially when and that's still the case. And you might get these pauses or it's trying to catch up. And it's an amazing technology when you think about it. The idea that you're drawing, in real time, and that the machine is, following that. I mean, it's kind of incredible. So obviously, yes, these upgrades were happening, but it was still pretty early iterations of the screens. So we were kind of finding our way through it. And but again, you adapt and you find a style. And I think we ended up. We somehow got a couple of these things, these Cintiq tablets, and started, just
started
digging
doing it.
in.
I think we ended up we had two Cintiq tablets. We were working, I had kind of a home studio space, so we were working out of there, and then we needed a software, and so we found this at the time, I think it was Manga Studio or Manga Studio Pro, something like that. It was like but it was really like for drawing comics. It had all these great page layout ways to easily break down and lay out the page. Also had these really incredibly responsive and nice brush tools, inking tools, and
the word bubbles.
You could do the lettering. It was just amazing. It was like a one-stop shopping center. You could just get in there and completely create the comic book from the ground up digitally. And what we found was that it was a really interesting way to kind of evolve our collaborative process, because traditionally what we have done is drawing on paper. We would share the pages back and forth, and Arnold would do the figure art. We may lay it out together, or I would lay out a panel and Arnold would just put in the figure art, or Arnold would start, if it were architectural based, because that would be more where I would focus, was the architecture, the things like cars and guns and the inanimate objects. And that was our flow, but it was always on a same physical page and kind of working around each other's art. And then when we got to this digital mode, we found that we could literally be drawing on the same page at the same time, and that I might be working on the same file, but just focusing on the backgrounds.
Yeah, I think we actually that we were doing that, and sometimes things
Got a
could
little
get
chaotic.
because there would be, what's the master page
What's the
anymore?
master
And
page,
so we did start to kind of like okay, let's work on separate pages. But these were all learning curves. These were all things that we just, again, learning by doing. And but yes, the collaboration did sort of evolve and find a new. It found a new way to express itself, and because we were sort of, locked into this methodology of collaboration that was very, practical. It worked, but it was also kind of, it took time. Sometimes I'd work faster and you'd work slower, or you might take a different approach that I didn't expect.
Do these super complex backgrounds.
Well, or even just like this, it just made, we were able to kind of inform each other a little bit more in a more accelerated way. Like, okay, what are you doing? What are we doing?
Well, and also just being able to say, oh, let's just create a layer and I'm going to sketch what I'm seeing roughly and then share that with Arnold, or vice versa, and then be like, oh, okay, got it. And then we can use that as a kind of base to just redraw something or whatever. So it was very fluid and
very
organic.
Immediate, and made the collaboration, I think, kind of fresh. It gave it a kind of, it sort of gave us, because I think part of us wanted to do this because we wanted to tell the story, but there was another side of kind of dreading like another massive project that was going to take years to do. So here was suddenly this opportunity to do something really dynamic and, and push us creatively and collaboratively. And that ended up being, I think one of the things that makes the project, makes GirlFIEND a real sort of, hopefully fresh, but also I almost feel like it feels kind of like it's kind of new again. Like we were kind of, it was as if we were drawing for the first time, in a lot of ways.
It was definitely like a kind of a turning point evolution in our creative process. And I would say ultimately it extended our ability to just work in that space. I think we were both kind of drawn out, and the economics of it weren't really compelling for us to take on comic book projects, which is why we hadn't drawn a comic in 10 years. But this really reinvigorated the spirit of being able to work independently and find ways to keep creating in spite of the economics or the industry kind of situation.
It actually inspired us to get some of the other projects that we had done sort of rebooted and given a new life in the digital space, which had culminated in creating FuseComics.com, which is where our sort of our digital imprint of the our creator-owned books that we were suddenly taking to a next level in the digital comic space. So, by doing new covers and adding more pages to existing stories. So I think it allowed us to sort of come back to our catalog, if you will, and sort of give it, inject it with some new life as well.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, the digital it was almost like the digital drawing was really merging with the era of digital publishing, and that whole spirit of that really reinvigorated us to look back at our earlier works, the earlier catalog that was published, but in many ways, fairly indie and, falling into some level of obscurity. And it was really like, let's really re-examine these things and republish them in the digital space where they're independently published, and start to really push out that digital space and platform as a way in which to continue to tell stories.
Yeah. So one of the things I found was kind of enlightening and unexpected was going from the inking process of inking on paper to suddenly inking in this digital space just went not just a lot faster, but it was more flexible. And, because inking on paper, you had to do these really slow lines and you might have this really fresh pencil line and sometimes you couldn't always capture that in the inks. And so to be able to just, have this really fast line that was as fast as a pencil line, but in the inks, and even if it didn't look right, like say it was a hair, like say if it was a body part or maybe like the flow of hair or something organic, I could just do the line. If I didn't like where it landed, Command Z, do another line, undo. Command Z, undo until
it landed.
Boom, there it is. And so it just it gave it a more kind of definitive look in the inks, and also closer to what the vision really would be from the pencil line. So that I found to be really fun, and exciting. Like, oh wow, I can make the inks look more like what I want them to look like.
Yeah.
So that was a big pro. And then I don't know, what did you?
I mean, for me, I think one of the big pros was discovering this really pretty advanced perspective tool in Manga Studio Pro at the time, and which in the works that we've done over the years, doing these elaborate architectures was always something that I was super inspired about doing, and it was just kind of a technical challenge, but it also created such a great illusion of space and environment setting.
But you would do these insane perspectives, like especially like with Batman. You started doing them. They would dirty up the page so much, the master page, that you would do them on these pieces of paper.
Yeah,
separate
I think
piece of
that
bond
actually
paper, and that went back to
doing
X
triple
and-
X,
yeah.
just at an X, yeah.
So you'd have these the actual master drawings on these pieces of bond paper that sometimes you'd light table even those from a rougher version, and then you do another bond paper version before and then clean that up before you actually committed it to the original.
To the actual comic book page.
Yeah, it's a lot of light table work.
A lot of light table work. So effectively doing the same kind of thing as like the layers process would be in the digital space. But yeah, that was really where that originated. And part of that was wanting to be able to draw not like super rigid architectural forms, but literally hand draw it first. Like get the arc of the arm in it, so it wasn't a straight line, but it was a slight curve to it, and that these things were really first drawn as almost like gesture drawings, so that the buildings themselves would feel like characters, and
personality.
Yeah, had personality, had form.
Well, they also have weight. They're gravity. Gravity is pulling people down, and I think that's something that it's a bit of a a tangent, but why a lot of digital animation of figures looks so unrealistic, and it's starting to change as you're getting people who really know how to draw, also working these incredibly complicated programs, because I think a lot of people that were basing those programs on just what the way light falls on a figure and that sort of thing didn't consider gravity and the sort of pulling of the figure. Everything is, you're pulling against gravity when a body moves, and so anatomy is always kind of in conflict or in some sort of tension with gravity. And I think the same applies to architecture.
Yeah, for sure. And even drawing the buildings in Holland, when we were doing that previous project, you would literally see buildings sagging or leaning forward and propped up with giant logs, so they wouldn't fall onto the street at times when it was just the natural process. So anyway, kind of getting that. But what so what was cool about the digital medium and working in Manga Studio was because there were these built-in perspective tools, which were effectively like drawing in having snap lines to draw to, and being able to establish where your vanishing points were. It allowed me to draw these very complicated street scenes super fast, like lightning fast, and do it in a way that was almost like a sketch, like really worked as a kind of blend between a sketch. Sometimes I wouldn't even need to do an underdrawing. I could just start to do it because I kind of could see in my head what I wanted it to be, and really just start doing it, and then take another layer to do the embellishing and the shading and the texture on. And sometimes we would do that collaboratively. It would be like, I would draw the kind of the superstructure of whatever this building or thing was, and then Arnold would take that file and with the brush line and all of those snap lines turned off, go in and get shading and texture and the dings and all that. So it was cool. Yeah. So that would be one of
the interesting things also to that was that you, by virtue of feeling more comfortable and more kind of flexible in the process, you actually, even though it's digital, you were giving it a more organic treatment
and loosening up and experimenting even more, in a way. So that
which is cool because I feel like a lot of times, that can happen as you're, and I think it happens in every medium. Like that first sketch has this energy and this life, and then you want to keep that, you want to maintain that, and that brings me to I'd say the con. If we're ready to transition to that, but is with the penciling. Like I know, with the layouts, it was really practical. Like taking these thumbnails, importing them in, and really getting the anatomy of the story kind of nailed down. Like, okay, this is what the action's going to be. We know what that is. Now we can talk about how to give that a look. But when it really came to the penciling, at least the figure pencils, I would find that that a lot of times that line quality, that maybe the feel of the stylus on the surface, or it was fine for, say, again, layouts or getting a general sense of things, but it just didn't have the soulfulness. It didn't have that energy that kind of comes through when you draw on paper. And so it just got to the point where it was like, I don't think this looks as good and doesn't feel as emotionally compelling. So just had to really kind of go back to the sketchbook, go back and really do some of the master drawings on paper in the pencil form, and then import those in to be inked.
Yeah, yeah. And on the flip side of that, sometimes I would do a lot of the thumbnails, just the real rough page layouts on GirlFIEND, that particular project, and they were very basic drawings. But sometimes, in terms of this whole speed factor, sometimes you would just take those and just start drawing with an ink brush, and never even go through a pencil phase on some of those.
And I think that, and what's kind of cool about that, and I think that was an evolution of the collaboration too, is that the inks or the final art started, of even some of the figures, particularly like Drake and some of the biker gang, and they started really looking like your drawings, like the way you draw figures, which is sometimes a little more kind of wily and, freaky and, like more almost gives it a little bit more of like a Zap Comics feel too, And so I think that the spirit of that, just again capturing the energy of that. I was like, well, I don't even need to redraw this. I'm just gonna vibe off this. So it did, and I think that when I would work on the the environments, because I did ink some for learning the snap tools and those curve tools, and it didn't. Because there was that thing of like, oh, this is your line. Like you have a line when you draw on paper, and it's clearly yours. Versus if I tried to, I don't know, for the sake of expedience, do some of the backgrounds, you really could tell it wasn't your line. So, but somehow with this in this digital forms, they became, the line you could. There was a uniformity.
No, for sure, yeah, for sure. And I think that like one of the things when we were drawing on paper, Arnold was drawing with a brush, but I would be drawing with either way
Technical
back drawing
pen,
with technical pens like rapidographs. On a book we did called Accelerate, I actually decided to just draw it all, not with felt pens, but with those
Uniball.
I was just like, this goes fast, and it gave it its own little
I think
kind
you
of
did Batman with those too.
Maybe so.
Because they were really kind of like, they had a really nice line flow, and they were really clean, but that they were oil based. So,
But with the digital drawing, we were able to really use the same brush and pen tools on both,
right?
And so it really did make the stuff start to even become, like Arnold was saying, more harmonious aesthetically.
And I think it also led to, and this was kind of a pro, but we started designing things in black and white. And one of the things that I think we were challenged with was how are we going to have this strobe light effect, look, and really designed this sort of negative, positive, kind of feel as texture to replicate the feel of a strobe light. I don't know. I mean, I felt like that was kind of a signature look.
And just finding ways to use the digital medium to like quickly invert the image or a portion of the image that had you kind of plotted that out as a black and white inking.
It was kind of a 3-step process. I remember there wasn't just positive, negative. There was some.
And then as far as cons, like kind of for me, getting back to the architecture side of it, is that although these incredible architectural, or perspective tools exist in that program, they were all very much straight lines. Like it did. Although I could sketch the stuff out, it didn't allow me to really ink very quickly with curved lines. I would have to I wouldn't be able to do it in a snap.
Curved lines felt cold. I mean, they just felt more. There is that curve.
You have a curved tool, but it just
didn't always translate.
You were limited in the kinds of renderings that you could do with that, or what kind of brush tool or whatever.
Because back in the day, we were using French curves.
Yeah,
there's a lot of French curve and manipulating for, and then it got to the point where you were using those
nautical
curves, right?
Curves, because they were larger, and that was
real long slopes, and
and
you're creating kind of sort of vanishing points and things that are way off the page,
which is good about the digital side, because you could physically you can zoom way out and have a vanishing point be what would seem like, if it was a piece of paper, would literally be across the building or whatever, so it'd be physically impossible to do, or at least 10,
I remember
10
something
feet
like
away.
doing like guesstimating, it's over by the chair or whatever.
So but and then I think the biggest con, or not, maybe not the biggest one, but the one that's really interesting as it relates to going to comic cons is I
see what you did there.
See what I did there? Nice segue. Is there's no original art. There's no physical page, and the wonderful thing about drawing on paper is there's this work of art at the end.
That's true.
And it does have all the smudges on it, and even on the back might have some sketches. It has all these interesting little tales to tell.
It's like a little piece of history.
Yeah. So with going all the way back to our first book that we drew, Grendel, we still have some of those pages to this day. In fact, we have them up on our Etsy page that people are still buying those, although we're running out of them. We don't have many left. But with GirlFIEND, unfortunately, that's a book that there are no original pages.
Yeah. Well, and occasionally I go through the flat drawers, and we have a pretty like packed series of flat drawers of pretty much our entire work in comics. But we've done a lot of drawing on paper, let's just say. But there is suddenly that little stack of those GirlFIEND pages from
the original
beginnings of like chapter 1 that are that actually have pencils and inks on them, because I think I was living in LA at the time.
You were starting
to ink it, and then I'll send them up to you, and that's when it was like, okay, reality check. But in the drawers, it's like, oh, those are the last original drawn pages, and the transition to this new era, and that is a bit bittersweet.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop us. That just gets us like all riled up. Let's just keep drawing.
If anybody actually wants to see the process, the digital drawing process, we did make screen capture videos of the drawing of GirlFIEND. We have a link in the description below that you can check out, and it shows the drawing phase all the way from my thumbnails all the way to Arnold's finished inks on the figures. So it'll give you a little idea of just the kind of our process, the drawing process, and also just utilizing this digital medium to create a page. Next episode, we break down our follow-up graphic novel, GirlFIEND in Paris, a bloodthirsty bedtime story, and the challenges of collaborating during a pandemic lockdown to make something totally new and unexpected. GirlFIEND is published by Dark Horse Comics and available on our digital comics website, fusecomics.com. To get notified about new episodes, follow the Panda Bros podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to watch it on our Panda Bros YouTube channel.